BrightRock believes that with every change in life comes opportunity. The World Economic Forum puts change, its challenges and its opportunities on a global stage. This World Economic Forum special edition Biz News podcast is illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-match life insurance that changes as your life changes.
Well, here we are, Mike, getting ready for our final edition of the A+ show. It's amazing to think next week we're going to be 10,000 kilometers away from here, sitting in our studio in Bryanston, doing our A+ show as we always used to do.
But at least only once a week. It's quite taxing doing this daily thing, huh? I hope you're appreciating how much logistics goes into this, how much brain power goes into this.
Brain power, yeah. But first of all, an apology on the Biz News Interactive group. We had a recommendation that we do our final A+ from Davos, walking through the streets of Davos. Well, we weren't able to do that because it was a choice between an interview with a CTO, Chief Technology Officer of Tether. Tether is the biggest stablecoin in the world. It was worth $80 billion. It's now worth $73 billion. Still, it's a heck of a lot of dollars. And unfortunately, that took the time away from us. So we're back in our little studio, kind of. You'd call this a studio?
Yeah, it's been our daily go-to place. Get a little bit of silence, not a bad background. As we close off episode 5 of the World Economic Forum. It's been a good location.
Yeah. What happened in the last 24 hours for you?
I spent a lot of time. I looked over the interview with Palantir's chief executive. That was fascinating.
It was amazing, wasn't it?
Alex Karp. I'm really impressed by him. And he's pretty anti-Silicon Valley. And as you said in previous episodes, he's proof that you can really speak your mind and it's still for the good of mankind what you're doing. And you don't always have to be popular. He certainly doesn't seem to be too popular, but he seems like a pretty good human being. Their values of their company seem to be spot on. I found that very interesting. I watched that last night. And then I've spent time in a briefing which was looking at freedom of the media. That was this morning. And then another one on reporting from the front lines, war correspondents in Ukraine, Ukrainians that are here. Very, very important message that they've come back with. So that was my morning, Alec.
Yeah, and I'm going home with some very useful insights. And it's interesting. They had the final lunch at the Schatzalp, which is way up in the mountains. And it's really beautiful. And usually, it's just too cold to enjoy the food. This time, of course, being summer and the weather improved today, it was spectacular. However, that was also I was engaged with a Ukrainian lady who was based in Kyiv, now took her family to Berlin, but she's part of this delegation. And I asked her if she felt that the Ukrainians had made an impact here in Davos, and she said absolutely. They do feel as though the world now really knows that it can't just forget about Ukraine, that if they're given weapons, the Ukrainian people are not asking anyone else to go and die for them.
Yeah.
Or they say they're dying for the rest of the world. That's their view of it. But they say they can beat the Russians if they're given the weapons. And indeed, they seem to be getting it. So to me, that was a big theme of this conference. But the other big theme for me, and it always is in Davos, is what is the future? What are the things you need to be, where are the flags? Where should you be focusing your attention? And this morning I went into a session on quantum computing, where Gillian Tett from the Financial Times quoted Alex Karp. And she said she took something out of his RPO, head of the Palantir listing, and he said that with the development of artificial intelligence and basically social media, there were no regulations, no rules were put down beforehand. So as a consequence, both of those areas have just exploded in a way that the commercial interests wanted them. And the recommendation she had, and indeed it was confirmed here, is that quantum computing should be different. There should be rules that are implemented so that people cannot profit, they cannot profit to the detriment of other human beings or society.
If I had to ask well, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Quantum computing, I can't be the only one going, what are you talking about, Alec?
Yeah, it is something that is still very early days for us. Quantum physics, of course, is what Einstein was talking about 100 years ago, that it's very hard to get your head around. But quantum computing is a leapfrogging in computing power, which will take us to, or take our machines to, an area where they can answer impossible to answer questions at the moment. At the moment, we're at 100, they were explaining where we are. We're at 100 qubits, they call it, in the quantum computers. We need to get to, I think it's 1,000. So we're, 1 million. We need to get to 1 million. So we're a long, long way away from it. But as it was suggested in a different conversation, with the tracking of the human genome, when we'd got to 1% after 5 years, I think it was, in a 10-year project, the media was saying, what a disaster, what a failure. But actually, the scientists will tell you, if you've got to that point, you can, from there on, it's exponential growth. So they're talking 5, maybe 10 years' time before all the big questions of the world will be able to be answered by quantum computing. There's also big questions about what happens with our current encryption standards. And they, again, with quantum computing, they're putting in new standards. Now, the techies will know all about this. I was a little offsides. They spoke about RSA, which I thought was South Africa, and ECC, which, okay, I didn't have much view about that, European Customs Union or Commission. Those are the current encryption standards, and they're being replaced by a new one, which will be ready for quantum computing. So it's quantum computing, it's virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. Those are the three areas that I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to, and of course on top of that, cryptocurrency. So it's almost like, if you want to go and do homework and find out what's going to happen in the future, those would be your 4 areas to invest time in. Davos has got a record of highlighting tomorrow's trends, tomorrow's winners. And for me, that's what I'll be taking home, is a view that I'm going to start reading on those 4 subjects. A
little tidbit for those who want to go check out our YouTube later. I was on the other side of the camera, but thoroughly engaged in an interview you did. We don't have to give too much away, but as you said, tomorrow's news today, an interview with a gentleman from Israel who is revolutionizing the food industry. Is that correct?
Didier Touba, I think his name was. He was actually in this very room. And what they are doing, I mean, this is incredible. I like Beyond Meat. I love it. It's plant-based burgers. And Jackson's in Bryanston makes best burger that I've ever tasted. It tastes as good as any other, as a meat burger. But they're not doing plant-based meat. They're doing meat-based meat, but without slaughtering any cows. So what the development is they take cells out of cows and grow the cells into steaks. And it's ready just about to be available commercially. A key part of their team is the chef, who's Israel's version of Jamie Oliver, and he was saying that all the scientists who work there have to go for tasting courses so that they know what a good steak tastes like. So it's extraordinary. They're growing these steaks in a lab. He reckons it's going to be a complement to beef farming and chicken farming as well, and that in future the 70% of animals who are farmed in a terribly inhumane way through batteries and force fattened up, they will no longer be needed. to be treated in that way. So it's also doing good for the world.
So I'll bring you a couple of interesting sound bites that came to me from this press conference I was at this morning. Incredibly important story to hear the sacrifice, the courage of the journalists that are bringing the war in Ukraine to the rest of the world. We know that there is an information blackout on the Russian side, at least it's state-run media there. It's exactly what Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin wants to put out. On the other side, you've got international and local journalists who are facing horrendous conditions, very dangerous, and they're going through all of that to bring the rest of the world the situation on the ground. And imagine this, Alec. Sasha Vakulina, she was a senior business editor, not unlike yourself. And on the 13th of February, she's in Kyiv on assignment. She works for Euronews. And then 10 days later, 11 days later, on the 24th of February, she is automatically converted into a war correspondent because she's trapped in a country she can't get out of. She is Ukrainian. They report in, I think, 12 different languages or something. So she's a senior business editor who now has to strap on a bulletproof vest and a helmet and has to go to hospitals, train stations, bombed out buildings, and has to see immense human suffering, complete different shift in the way she has to see the world. That was thrust upon her. She said, I'd never known what a siren sounds like. She says, imagine you're sitting in Paris or in Rome or in Geneva and you hear this noise, but she said you're in a European capital city and you hear a siren. It's foreign to you. And she said she had to get a 15-minute briefing from an experienced war correspondent on the other side of the phone about how to act, how to be safe, where to go, how to travel, because it's a new set of skills you have to learn very quickly, or you're dead. It's as simple as that.
Yeah,
so
it's not like some of the unrest we've had, where you can almost see from a distance. Here, you might be walking down the street and there's a missile that explodes nearby, and that's you. Goodbye. How many journalists have died in Ukraine?
This is the second gentleman who was speaking, Mstislav Chernov, and I did an interview with him. He said about 30 journalists have been killed. The Ukrainian members of parliament we spoke to said about 27 or 29 had been killed. Some journalists have had to pick up weapons. They've had to fight. They found themselves in that situation. But a story from Mstislav Chernov for the Associated Press, war correspondent. He got stuck in Mariupol, couldn't get out. He was one of the last journalists stuck there. He managed to escape, went through 15 Russian checkpoints. Alec, I don't mean to be vulgar here, but to give you an idea of the lengths to which journalists will go to safeguard the information, the images, the video that they have, the SD card, where do you think that had to go?
It wasn't in his mouth.
No, it wasn't. You know, it's really something to think about.
Yeah. No, I mean, these people are heroes. The whole Ukrainian nation, everything we've seen here today is that the Ukrainian nation, it's a little bit like the parallels with the Spanish Civil War are very stark, because in Spain, the Spanish Civil War, there was an elected government in the 1930s, and the dictators of the time, Mussolini and Hitler, supported the fascists, who then, General Franco, who then took over the country. An elected government was ejected by the fascist powers. And you have a similar situation here where this is democracy. Ukraine's all about democracy. And if you'd met if our business community members who are still, there's a heck of a lot of fake news around. And so they swallow the fake news, unfortunately, because it's sometimes nice to be ornery and contrarian. But if you'd met the people here from Ukraine and had the opportunity, as Mike and I have had, of engaging with them, asking them questions, and just hearing their stories, you'd realize that this is Spanish Civil War Mark II. Fortunately, this time around, the Western powers are supporting democracy.
Yeah.
We know what happened in Spain. they appeased Germany and they did not support Spain back then. So at least we do learn from history in some points.
You are still tuned in to the World Economic Forum's special edition Biz News podcast, illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-match life insurance that changes as your life changes.
Last point I'll make from Mr. Chernoff, if you think you're having a difficult day at the office, maybe the weather is bad outside, there was a taxi cut you off this morning, the boss is angry with you about something. Imagine you're sitting in a bombed out hospital and there's one place on the 7th floor of a building that gives you connectivity to allow you as a journalist to get your visuals, maybe your voice, to be able to send it over the internet. There's one place that you can go, and it's on the 7th story, and they're shelling your building. Imagine the bravery, the courage it takes to climb up to the 7th floor, to stick that cell phone in the air, to try and get the signal, to get those all-important visuals out. I think we owe these people a debt of gratitude. It's incredible.
Well, they are certainly fighting for their country, and for them, time and again we heard that this is not a war where they can have peace. This is existential, and sometimes we forget when we're living in a relatively peaceful country what happens in a case like that. Last night I was invited to a cocktail party by the CEO of YouTube, Susan Wojcicki, I think is the way you pronounce it. Mm-hmm. And that was fascinating. What she did, and as you're watching this on YouTube, so you know that we at Biz News are making quite a large investment in video. But what she did was she brought out 3 people who've made a business in YouTube, young people, the one guy has got 50 million subscribers.
They derive an income. They are self-sustainable just from YouTube videos.
More than that, they've actually got businesses now that have been created around them. The one had 50 million. The other one, and he's a Palestinian born in Israel who is telling the story to the world. Then there was a guy who has 40 million. He's a wildlife. He does wildlife stories. And they have camera crews and they're full-on production teams. And then there was a third guy who has only 4 million subscribers. And he was also in the wildlife area, going to new places, explaining new places to people watching on YouTube. But to see the humility and the enthusiasm of these content providers or these content champions, it really lifts you and inspires you into knowing that this channel is quite incredible. And if you think about it, you can reach millions of people. You and I are sitting here, we produce this for South Africans, but there's no reason why someone in Alaska might be surfing through and pick it up and wow, they get to hear the South African side of the story. So there's a lot of positives that are coming out of Davos as well. We can dwell easily on the negatives, but that's a huge positive to me, the way that YouTube has democratized information. Quantum computing is another positive. One of the offshoots of the whole quantum area is that we get to learn we get to learn about the world in a different way, in the same way, for instance, that birds and whales know. They haven't got GPS systems, but the GPS system relative to what birds and whales, their homing systems, is very, very basic. And quantum computing is going to take us to the next level. And they made the point in that conversation that Putin has managed to block GPS in Ukraine. So the Ukrainian forces, they can't use GPS to get around. And it's quite amazing, actually. You think how reliant we are for location services nowadays on that very simple technology. But in future, that will be impossible because quantum computing will take us to the next level. So there's a lot of positives here when you look into the future and you see how things are improving. It reminds me of that book called Factfulness, which should be prescribed reading for everyone, because we kind of get caught up sometimes in the negativity of things and forget that the mankind has really progressed a heck of a long way in the last decade, in the last century, and in a decade's time, it would be unrecognizable where we are today. And a place like this it just reminds you of that and opens your eyes towards the way that human beings are actually evolving.
The world is so much bigger, so much more complex than we think. If you think you know it all, you're in a very dangerous position. I said to you yesterday, I'm becoming more comfortable realizing I'm the stupidest person in the room. And that's the right room to be in. And if there are certain briefings, I mean, we're able to speak here about things we understand. There are a lot of briefings I've attended where I simply couldn't, I can't intelligently tell you about it. It went completely over my head, and that's okay. That's why you keep coming back. That's how you learn.
Yeah, you can't share it yet. But
Yeah.
now you'll go back, you'll read about it, you'll find out more, you'll understand more, and the next time you watch that video, that recording, it'll all fall into place. And I think that's what you've just said is really the whole core of what this forum. It's a forum, for heaven's sake. If I hear once more, the WEF are going to control the world, and the WEF are going to take all the money away from the poor, from the rest of society, I think I might just have a blooming stroke on the spot, because it is so ridiculous. Please, fake news. There are factories that are producing fake news. The people with vested interest don't like this place. They don't like the WEF. They don't like the WEF because the WEF opens eyes. It lets you see how the world really is. It promotes education. It promotes learning. You learn from engaging with someone else, but you only learn if you go into the room as the dumbest person in the room. In other words, I know nothing. Let me open my mind. Let me open my head. And I think it was Socrates who said, that is the beginning of wisdom. And truly, if we can all just take that attitude, this place, man, it's easy to criticize. Of course, you get elites who come here flying on their jets and then say, we've got to cut down on the carbon footprint. I mean, there's hypocrisy everywhere in the world, and of course it's here as well, probably in chunks. But on the other hand, the ability of this organization to bring together diverse voices, to talk about issues that really matter to us as mankind, and to help us to go forward. Next time, don't prejudge. Just try and learn from it. And I just think that the WEF gets a bad rap in social media, and it doesn't deserve it. I've been here, it's my 17th time, as Mark said in the beginning of A+. I wouldn't keep coming back and spending a fortune to get here, because it is damn expensive. I mean,
Yes, it is.
You got the airfares, you got the accommodation. It's a long way from South Africa, a heck of a long way. But Michael, it's the best investment every year that I make. I keep thinking, do I have to go there again? And I leave just feeling, how do you value or how do you price the accumulation of knowledge? Especially when you do what we do, which is try and understand it so that we can share with our community. And I think we've done that quite well this time around.
Tried our very best, I think, Alec. I think as we close off episode 5, it's a privilege and a pleasure to have been at the World Economic Forum with you, Alec. Thanks for spilling over some of the 17 times to this very green person at this summit, at this forum.
Well, okay, I have to thank you, because this time round I was able to go into areas and go and listen in areas, whereas previously I was on a mission to feed the monster back home, and you fed the monster so well. So thanks, Mike. It's just been such a pleasure. I mean, it really is. It's being here together, going and eating supper, sitting in awe of how much you can consume. It's been great, and I hope that you've enjoyed our mission missives. I mean, it's not the prettiest. We didn't bring a cameraman. we acted as cameramen for each other,
That's
which was
right.
quite cool.
Don't tell them our secrets, Alec.
So we really have had a lot of fun here, and we've learned a lot, and I hope by osmosis over the next months we can share that with you, because this really, for me, and I've seen this every year, it's like you get a big injection in your head of distilled knowledge, and it takes a while to kind of seep through the system, and then suddenly, that makes sense, because something I'd heard or listened to, whereas at the time I was just absorbing. There's only so much a human brain can absorb, but the release, the slow release of this knowledge, this as the distilled knowledge gets dissipated into our system, it makes us better, I think, at doing the work that we do, which is serving our community and trying our best to keep you up to date with, or give you context on the stuff that's happening around the world. So thanks.
Yeah, that's it from episode 5, the A+ show on location in Davos. We'll see you back in Joburg.
Thanks for tuning in to this World Economic Forum special edition Biz News podcast illuminated by BrightRock, the first ever needs-match life insurance that changes as your life changes.